gentlemen also looked at the question of, well, when majority parties fail, why are they failing? Are they being blocked by the opposing party? Or, because the opposing party often controls key veto points? Or are they failing because they can't cohere sufficiently within their own ranks? So in order to get this, we look at where does legislation fail. So when you trace a legislative initiative through the process, where did it stop? Where did it end? So where was the bill introduced? Was it reported from committee? And that can tell us something about how or why it failed. We find that the single most common reason for a majority party failing on one of its agenda items is the 60-vote threshold in the Senate, the so-called supermajority Senate. That's the most common reason, and that's usually something you'd class as a veto player, that the other party controlled that 60th vote and prevented a majority party from doing what it wanted to do. There are a few cases where it was intra-party disagreement because Democrats did have 60 votes during the 111th Congress, 60 seats in the Senate during the 111th Congress, and still couldn't do some of the things they wanted to do. That's the most common reason. But the most common reason is what we call no formal action, which basically means a bill was introduced, the leadership talked about it, and then it never got reported from committee. They never could work it out in committee to move forward on the legislation. It should be regarded as a problem internal to the majority party, because there's no reason why a majority party shouldn't be able to report a bill out from a committee if it wants to move forward on a legislative item. So as we sort, we've got some other cases. Presidential veto is not a super important cause of majority party failure during this time period, in great part because the president's party is often in a position to block in the Senate, so that it never makes it to be vetoed. As we group all these causes of failure or points of failure for a majority party, find that about half of majority party agenda failures appear to be due to intra-party conflict rather than to veto points. So there's no evidence here that parties are being more blocked today by their opposition than they were. We might think that based on the data that I showed you at the start of the presentation on the rise of party cohesion in Congress. You might think that these highly cohesive parties, if they are failing to legislate on their agenda items, well, that has to be because they're being blocked by the opposing party. But the data on the legislative histories of majority party agenda items don't bear that interpretation out. They are not being blocked more often by veto players. This tracks the trends in or the lack of trends in each of those causes of majority party failure. Let me give you some examples. Remarkably, every majority party possessing unified control of government in our data set during this time period was unable to reach sufficient intra-party consensus on at least one of its top agenda priorities, causing it to fail in executing on that agenda item. So every majority party over this time period, in full command of unified control, failed on a top priority because it couldn't get together internally. Start with the Clinton health care plan. This is 1993-94. Liberal and moderate Democrats could not reach agreement on key policy questions, such as whether employers should be required to pay employee health care costs or whether the cost of premiums should be capped. They could not reach agreement on that. One of the key committees in the House couldn't report a bill. The two committees that had jurisdiction reported diametrically opposed bills. Never could work out those problems internally to the party. Didn't fail because it was blocked by the opposing party. It failed because they couldn't coalesce internally. In the 108th Congress, this is under George W. Bush, 2003-4, goal was to make the Bush tax cuts permanent. That was something that Republicans prioritized. But within the Republican Party, some members were concerned about deficits. And so there was disagreement. Should we make all the Bush tax cuts permanent or only some? And if we're going to make only some permanent, should we concentrate on lower income taxpayers or higher income taxpayers. They couldn't come to agreement. So the House moved forward on a bill, but the Senate never acted. In the 109th Congress, 2005-6, the major issue was Social Security reform. Right after the 2004 elections, when George W. Bush won re-election, he and Vice President Dick Cheney toured the country promoting major Social Security reform, the creation of private accounts within Social Security. It was designated H.R. 1 and S1 in the House and the Senate. Neither chamber ever reported a bill from committee. Republicans could not get together on the issue internally. It never came up for a vote. So it's not in the measures that I displayed to you earlier on, because there was never a roll call vote. When parties can't agree internally, they tend not to take votes to demonstrate to the public how disorganized they are. In the 111th Congress, the key Democratic Party failure was on climate change mitigation. House Democrats were eventually able to get a bill. This was very tough politics. They were eventually able to get a bill out of the House, but 44 Democrats opposed it, and the bill would not have passed the House without 8 Republican votes. So they needed some cross-party support just to get the bill out of the House. In the intra-party divisions on climate change were even more difficult. The Senate, a fully unified Democratic caucus with 60 votes for 5 months in the 111th Congress, could have passed it without a Republican support, but Democratic senators from oil drilling and coal mining states were expected to vote no. They were going to need support from 5 to 8 Republican senators, which was not forthcoming, so they couldn't get that bill done. And then, of course, most famously, in 2017, the Republican effort to repeal and replace Obamacare, which was pursued under expedited processes that would have allowed Republicans to pass the legislation without any cross-party support and budget reconciliation in the Senate. So filibuster was not an issue. But the first effort in the House, they had to pull the bill. They finally got it out of the House, but only with a lot of Republicans voting no, barely made it out of the House. And in the Senate, they bargained all summer long in 2017, but could not get together on a major reform. Finally, as a last-ditch effort, they proposed so-called skinny repeal, which was a very modest piece of legislation that would not have undone any significant provisions of the Affordable Care Act. It would have left the subsidies in place. It would have left the insurance marketplaces in place. The regulations on insurance companies would have remained in place. And that was tanked by McCain in the late-night vote. Well, I was sort of surprised at how much media coverage that got, because skinny repeal was such a weak piece of legislation. Even if it had passed, it was nothing close to repealing Obamacare. So the Republican Party was completely at odds over what to do on that issue.